Some people feel that stories naturally fall into 3 acts, or maybe 5 acts, or 9 acts, or something else. And this is necessarily the way any successful story is constructed. Well, I'm not going to go that far, but I will say that in games, if the game doesn't have phases where what the player does changes from one to the next, and what the player thinks about changes from one phase to the next, then it had better be a short game or it's going to get tedious. Now, I know there are MMOs where people do the same thing over and over again constantly, which is called the grind. In fact, it's so simple-minded that you can have bots, small automated programs, do it for you. And it can be so tedious that people are willing to pay somebody else to do it and then buy the account that results. Well, I would rather design a game where people enjoy the journey as well as the destination that doesn't have a grind in it. So games that have phases in them avoid the grind by changing what players think about and what they do. In chess, for example, there's an opening game where you're deploying your pieces and probably not capturing a lot of pieces. Then there's a middle game where there's a lot of capture and perhaps a fight to control the middle of the board. And finally there's an end game where the focus is on checkmating the opposing king. And what the players do and think in those different phases is different. In role-playing games, you have the very low levels where players are just trying to survive. Then you have low level where they can do some things, but they're not going to be fighting anything like a dragon. And then you have higher levels where the players are really powerful individuals, or the players' characters are really powerful individuals. So role-playing games naturally have a change in phase. And in fact, many games these days, especially video games, have a gradually increasing capability for the player's avatar. So the avatar collects levels and perks and loot, which may be magic items or technological items or just plain guns. They get better stuff, and so they're more capable, and so how they behave changes. Games that have levels provide a kind of phasing because each level has its own focus and its own way of doing things. Now, more generally, we have what's called the 3-act format, and film students are taught, if not browbeaten, that this is the way that a movie must be written, in 3 acts. Some people confine this just to tragedies, some people include it in everything. Roughly speaking, those 3 acts amount to this. The first act has the introduction of characters and exposition of the problems or the conflicts to come. In the second act, the protagonist takes on various obstacles. Often an antagonist is involved, and this can be the darkest act when things look really grim. Then in the third act you have a resolution or climax where the protagonist overcomes the obstacles, and a denouement, what happens afterward. Things get sorted out. There are lots of ways to define these 3 acts, and this goes all the way back to Aristotle 2,500 years ago. But some people think there are 5 acts or 9 acts or something else. It's an interesting situation where people are trying to identify an ideal way to write stories or to construct stories, but they disagree about what that ideal way is. And that leads us to the modern notion of the hero's journey. This was identified by Joseph Campbell in a book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces in 1949. And it's epitomized in Star Wars. Star Wars, whether consciously or not, tends to follow the hero's journey in considerable detail. And I'm talking about just the first Star Wars movie. There are details of mentors, of the challenge refused at first, and so forth and so on. And Star Wars seems to match those details. Entire books have been written about this story form other than Campbell's. If you're very much into stories, you should read some of those books. But is it necessary for designing games? No. because games are rarely primarily about stories. Even if they have a story attached, even if the players are forced to follow a story that's imposed by the designers, most games are about overcoming obstacles, not about stories. Well, game designers design games, not stories. If you have a big video game with a big story in it, then they will hire a writer to write the story, not the game designer. The game designer won't write the story. A lot of game designers are frustrated novelists, but that's not the ideal for designing games.